It was a regular Thursday evening. I stood at the kitchen counter, loading the dishwasher, while the muffled sounds of my son playing video games drifted down from upstairs. In the living room, Emily sat on the couch, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her phone. That distant look on her face, somewhere between distracted and preoccupied, had become almost routine. Then she laughed. Not the polite, half-hearted chuckle-eyed groan used to, but a full, unguarded laugh, rich and genuine. It startled me. "What's so funny?" I asked, glancing over my shoulder. She didn't look up. "Oh, just a meme Scott sent me," she replied, quickly swiping at the screen. "Scott's been on a roll lately, huh?" I tried to keep my tone light, casual. Her smile faltered slightly. "Yeah, you know how he is." Scott, the longtime family friend who'd been like a brother to Emily since college. A good guy, charming in that effortless way that made everyone like him. I had no reason not to trust him, or her. And yet, something about that laugh, about how her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in weeks, stuck with me. I shook it off. Everyone needs friends, I told myself. Friends who make them laugh, especially when life gets stressful. The next morning, Emily left early for work. I was alone, sipping my coffee, when I noticed a new notification on our shared calendar, lunch with S. I couldn't stop myself. I called her. "Hey, what's up?" she answered, cheerful and breezy, the sound of traffic faint in the background. Saw the calendar update. "Who's S?" "Oh," she said, a fraction too casually. "It's Scott. He's in town for a few days, and he wanted to grab lunch. You didn't mention he was coming to town." "Didn't I? Huh. Guess it slipped my mind. It's no big deal, just lunch." Her explanation felt too smooth, her tone too light. "Right," I said, forcing a laugh. "No big deal." But my stomach tightened. Why hadn't she told me? She never forgot small details like that. That evening, Emily came home in high spirits, her mood bright, her laugh easy. She chattered about her day, her work, even the errands she'd run. Not a single word about lunch with Scott. "So, how was lunch?" I asked as we cleared the table. "Good," she said, stacking plates. "Scott's doing well. Same old Scott." I waited for her to elaborate, but she didn't. She smiled, carried the dishes to the sink, and started washing up as though the question hadn't been important. Later that night, I sat alone in the living room while she slept. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, but her laptop sat on the coffee table, open. I stared at it, conflicted. Then I gave in. Her email was logged in. The most recent exchange was with Scott. Subject line, "Looking forward to seeing you." I hesitated, then clicked. The messages were brief, but one stood out. His reply, "I miss those days sometimes too. You've always understood me better than anyone else ever could." My heart pounded in my chest. The words weren't explicit, but the tone. They weren't the kind of words you'd exchange with just a friend. There was an intimacy there, a familiarity that didn't belong. I closed the laptop and sat back, my hands trembling. No proof, no accusations to make, just a creeping certainty that something was slipping through my fingers. And in the dark silence of the room, one question repeated over and over in my mind. What am I missing? The air felt heavier over the next week, though nothing outwardly dramatic had changed. It was the little things, the whispers of difference, that chipped away at me. I was still clinging to the idea that I might be overreacting, but every day seemed to present a new sliver of evidence, enough to unsettle me but not enough to accuse Emily outright. It started with her perfume. Emily rarely wore it except for special occasions, but that Wednesday morning, the faint, floral scent lingered on the air as she rushed out the door. She was in a hurry, brushing a kiss on my cheek and saying something about a meeting downtown. I wanted to ask her why she'd gone to the trouble of spritzing herself before what I assumed was just another day at the office, but I stopped myself. It's nothing, I thought. Maybe she's trying to boost her confidence. By the time I walked into the kitchen to pour coffee, her car was pulling out of the driveway. But there it was again, the slight shift in routine. She'd left her travel mug on the counter, untouched. Emily never skipped coffee. I chalked it up to forgetfulness. We've all had mornings like that, I told myself, brushing off the tension coiling in my chest. 2 days later, I noticed her gym bag sitting by the front door. It was dusty, as if it hadn't been touched in weeks. Yet, for the past month, Emily had been religiously going to yoga classes every Thursday evening. "It's my escape," she'd said once, smiling as she rolled her mat under one arm. "My hour to just breathe and focus." But last night, her routine had shifted. She'd left for yoga as usual, but when she returned, there was no gym bag in sight, no sweat-dampened shirt to toss into the hamper, no water bottle to rinse. Just Emily, freshly showered, smiling like she'd had the best workout of her life. "Yoga good tonight?" I'd asked casually, handing her a glass of wine. "Really good," she'd said, slipping off her shoes and settling into the couch. Exactly what I needed. Her answer was so smooth, so natural, that I almost let it go. But as I loaded the dishwasher later that night, I spotted the untouched gym bag by the door, dust outlining the base where it hadn't been moved in days. What was she doing then? The next morning, I couldn't resist testing the waters. "You didn't bring your bag in last night," I said, gesturing toward it as she poured cereal for breakfast. "Oh," she said without looking up. "I forgot it in the car." I raised an eyebrow but didn't press her further. What was I supposed to say? "Actually, your bag hasn't left the house in weeks, and I know because I've been watching like a lunatic." Still, I felt a knot forming in my stomach, tightening with each new inconsistency. Things escalated that Sunday afternoon. I'd been working on a few overdue repairs in the garage when I noticed something odd. The passenger seat of Emily's car was pushed farther back than usual, as though someone taller than her had been sitting there. It wasn't completely out of place. Emily often drove coworkers to lunch or meetings, but it was the first time I'd noticed it in months. I opened the car door, scanning for anything unusual. The faintest hint of cologne hung in the air. Not hers, not mine. By the time she came outside to check on me, my heart was pounding. "Need any help?" she asked, leaning against the garage frame with a smile. "No, I'm good," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Hey, did you give someone a ride this week? Your passenger seat's pushed way back." She blinked, the faintest flicker of something crossing her face before her usual calm returned. "Oh, yeah, one of the interns at work needed a ride to the bus station. I guess I forgot to adjust it back." The explanation made sense. Too much sense. That evening, I resolved to stop torturing myself. This was all circumstantial, I told myself. Random coincidences that I was stringing together into a narrative because of my own insecurities. It was time to let it go. And then I found the receipt. I'd gone to the laundry room to check on a load of towels when I spotted it on the floor, half crumpled under the edge of the washing machine. The logo at the top caught my eye immediately. The Willow Inn? I smoothed it out, scanning the details. A dinner for two. Wine. Dessert. Last Friday, the night she'd supposedly gone to yoga. I felt a strange sort of numbness as I stared at the paper, my brain struggling to make sense of it. It couldn't mean what it looked like. It had to be something else, an old receipt she'd saved for tax purposes, maybe. But as I flipped it over, my chest tightened. Written in her handwriting, scrawled along the back, "Next time, I'll pick the wine, winky face." My legs went weak. I sank onto the edge of the washing machine, clutching the receipt in trembling hands. There was no way to rationalize this. No innocent explanation to cling to. I tried to picture her sitting across from someone at the Willow Inn, laughing, sipping wine, flirting enough to jot a playful note on the back of a receipt. And suddenly, the pieces started falling into place. The perfume, the gym bag, the adjusted seat in her car. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. When she came home later that night, humming softly to herself, I couldn't look at her the same way. She kissed me on the cheek and asked how my day had been, her tone light and cheerful. "Fine," I said flatly, shoving the receipt deeper into my pocket. As she busied herself in the kitchen, my mind raced. I needed time to process this, to figure out what came next. The doubt was gone now, replaced by a cold, burning certainty. My wife, the woman I'd built my life with, was hiding something. And whatever it was, it had already started tearing us apart. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope strung over a yawning chasm. Every glance from Emily felt weighted, every touch unfamiliar, as though I were seeing her through a stranger's eyes. The receipt burned a hole in my pocket. I carried it around like a talisman, unable to throw it away yet unsure of what to do with it. Confronting her seemed like an act I wasn't ready for. Not yet. Instead, I found myself consumed by the storm in my head, vacillating between two opposing forces. On one side was my desire to trust her, to believe that this was all a misunderstanding, the kind of tangled web life occasionally spins without malice. On the other was the gnawing certainty that things were unraveling, and I was the only one pretending the thread wasn't fraying. That Thursday evening, I called my brother, Matt. He was the only person I could think of who might offer perspective without judgment. Matt had always been pragmatic, the kind of guy who saw things clearly when everyone else got lost in the fog. "Something's going on with Emily," I said, pacing the backyard while the cicadas droned in the background. "Something like what?" Matt asked cautiously. I hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "I don't know. She's been acting different. She's hiding things. I found a receipt for a dinner, and she didn't tell me about it. It doesn't add up." Matt sighed, the familiar sound of his patience being tested. "Do you have proof, or is this just a gut feeling?" "I have the receipt," I said, pulling it from my pocket as if he could see it through the phone. "She went to the Willow Inn with someone last Friday." "That's not yoga, Matt." There was a long silence before Matt spoke again, and his voice was calm but firm. "Okay, so what do you want to do about it?" His question landed heavily, as though I'd stepped off the tightrope and was free falling. "I don't know. What if I'm wrong? What if there's a reasonable explanation, and I blow everything up for nothing?" "And what if you're not wrong?" Matt countered. "Look, you need to figure out what you're willing to live with. Either confront her, or you don't. But don't sit in this limbo forever. It'll eat you alive." His words struck a nerve, and I realized I was already being consumed. Every passing day, every unanswered question was carving away pieces of me, leaving a hollowed-out version of the man I used to be. "I don't want to accuse her without knowing for sure," I said finally. "I need more than a hunch, more than this receipt." "Then find out," Matt said. "But whatever you do, don't let it fester. It'll only make things worse." His advice stayed with me long after I hung up, echoing in the silence of the backyard as the cicadas buzzed like static. I needed clarity, one way or the other. The next day, I decided to take action, or at least a step toward clarity. I drove to the Willow Inn, a charming brick building nestled on the edge of town. It was a place Emily and I had celebrated anniversaries, shared quiet moments, and made memories. The thought of her being there with someone else felt like a betrayal of everything we'd built. I walked in, the hostess greeting me with a polite smile. "Table for one?" she asked. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually, I was hoping to ask about a visit here last Friday. My wife might have left something behind. A scarf, maybe?" Her smile faltered slightly, and she tilted her head. "Do you know what time she was here?" "Evening," I said. "Dinner. She might have been with someone else." The hostess nodded slowly and moved to the computer. "Let me check. Do you know her name?" I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat like glass. Emily Carter." She typed for a moment before glancing back at me. "We did have a reservation under Emily Carter last Friday. It was for two. I don't see anything in the lost and found, though." "I'm sorry." "Thanks," I said, my mouth dry. Her confirmation hit me like a blow. It wasn't definitive. She could have been with a coworker or a friend, but it was one more link in the chain tightening around my chest. That evening, Emily came home late. I was sitting in the living room, staring at the blank TV screen, when she walked in. "Sorry I'm late," she said, dropping her purse on the kitchen counter. "Work was crazy." I nodded but didn't respond. "You okay?" she asked, her brow furrowing as she stepped closer. I looked at her, searching for any trace of the woman I'd married, the woman I still wanted to believe she was. "Where were you last Friday night?" The question caught her off guard, and for a brief moment, I saw something flash across her face. Panic? Guilt? Something unspoken. She quickly recovered, her expression smoothing over like polished glass. "I told you," she said, her tone measured, carefully controlled. Yoga. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch, waiting for her to crack under the weight of her own lie. But she didn't. She just stood there, meeting my gaze with an almost defiant calm. Right? I said finally, standing up. Forget I asked. She reached for me, her fingers brushing my arm, but I pulled away, heading upstairs. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed. Emily's side was cold, the sheets perfectly smoothed. As I padded downstairs, I noticed her gym bag was gone from the front door. For a moment, hope flickered. Maybe she really was going to yoga. Maybe I'd been wrong. I poured coffee and sat at the table, scrolling absently through my phone when a knock at the door startled me. It was Scott. He stood there in his running gear, holding a thermos and smiling like nothing was amiss. "Hey, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "I was out for a run and thought I'd stop by. Got a minute?" Sure," I said, stepping aside to let him in. Scott set the thermos on the counter and leaned against it casually. "Emily mentioned you've been stressed lately. Everything okay?" My jaw tightened. So they've been talking about me. "Yeah, just work stuff," I said flatly. He nodded, his eyes scanning the kitchen. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm around. You know that, right?" I nodded, unsure of what to say. The sight of him standing there, so at ease in my home, made my skin crawl. After a few minutes of strained small talk, he left, and I stood there, gripping the counter as anger bubbled beneath my skin. If they weren't hiding something, why did it feel like I was the one being kept in the dark? That evening, when Emily returned, she seemed different. Her hair was damp from a shower, her cheeks flushed, and she was in an unusually good mood. "Yoga was amazing today," she said, kicking off her shoes. "I really needed that." I stared at her, the weight of Scott's visit and her own inconsistencies pressing down on me. Her cheerful tone felt like nails scraping against raw nerves. For the first time, I truly understood what Matt had meant about limbo. It was time to stop waiting. I couldn't stay on the tightrope any longer. Something had to give. By Saturday morning, I'd reached my breaking point. The lies, or what I was now convinced were lies, had piled too high to ignore. Confronting Emily directly had gotten me nowhere, and my attempts to rationalize the evidence were unraveling faster than I could patch them together. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. It started with her car. While Emily took the kids to a friend's birthday party, I stayed behind under the pretense of cleaning the garage. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I retrieved the spare key and opened her trunk. The gym bag was there again, this time packed tightly. I unzipped it, my heart racing, and began sorting through its contents. Yoga mat, water bottle, towel, all accounted for. But in the side pocket, something caught my eye, a receipt from a gas station several towns over. The date was last Thursday, the night she was supposed to be at yoga. I stared at the slip of paper, the printed address staring back like a mocking smirk. Why would she need gas in a town that wasn't on her usual route? My mind raced with possibilities, none of them innocent. Stuffing the receipt back into the bag, I zipped it shut and closed the trunk. This was the thread I needed to pull. That evening, I waited until Emily had gone to bed. Once her breathing had deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep, I crept downstairs to her home office. She kept her laptop there, always logged into her accounts. Opening her browser, I navigated to her email. At first, it was the usual: work updates, newsletters, coupons. But then, tucked among the mundane, I found it. A reservation confirmation from a boutique hotel in the same town as the gas station. The booking was for 2 nights, starting last Thursday. My pulse quickened as I clicked the email open. There was no mention of a second guest, but the confirmation didn't need to state the obvious. She hadn't been alone. The date and time on the reservation matched perfectly with the gas station receipt. My chest felt tight, my breaths coming in shallow bursts as I stared at the screen, trying to grasp the enormity of what I'd just uncovered. The next morning, I could barely look at her. She moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, humming softly as she poured cereal for the kids and sipped her coffee. It was all so normal, so maddeningly ordinary. I decided to set a trap. "Emily," I said, keeping my voice even. I've been thinking. We should do something together. Just us. Maybe next weekend? She looked up, her smile faltering slightly. For a split second, something flickered across her face. Hesitation? Guilt. Before she quickly masked it with her usual composure. Next weekend? I think I might have a work thing, but I can check. The ease with which the lie slid out of her mouth sent a wave of anger crashing through me. Work thing? I repeated, leaning against the counter. What kind of work thing? Just a client meeting, she said breezily, turning her attention back to her plate. I nodded, masking my frustration. Let me know if it changes. Inside, I was seething. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. The lies had become as casual as her morning routine. On Tuesday, I made a call to the hotel. Pretending to be Emily, I asked for a copy of the invoice for her stay, claiming I needed it for work reimbursement. My hands were shaking as I waited on hold, the silence punctuated only by the sound of my pounding heartbeat. To my surprise, the receptionist sent it over without hesitation. The details confirmed what I'd feared: 2 occupants, 1 room. The name of the second guest wasn't listed, but it didn't matter. My mind immediately filled in the blank. Scott. That evening, I decided it was time for answers. Emily, I said after the kids were in bed, can we talk? She looked up from her phone, her expression neutral, almost too neutral. Sure, what's up? I hesitated, my heart pounding. My palms felt clammy, and my voice came out lower than I intended. I know about the hotel. Her face froze, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But instead, she sighed, setting her phone down. Mark, I can explain. Then explain, I said, my voice sharp, cutting through the tension like a blade. She folded her hands, her gaze flicking to the floor. It was a work retreat. Last minute. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to stress you out. My hands clenched into fists. A work retreat? With who? She hesitated, then said, with some colleagues. It was just a networking thing. You expect me to believe that? I demanded, pulling out the gas station receipt and slapping it onto the table. Why didn't you tell me where you were? Why lie? Her eyes darted to the receipt, her face paling. She opened her mouth, but no words came out at first. Finally, she managed, Mark, it wasn't a lie. I just didn't think it mattered. Didn't matter? I snapped. A hotel stay doesn't matter? A trip 2 towns over doesn't matter? I was going to tell you, she said, her voice cracking. I just didn't know how. You've been so distant lately, so suspicious. I didn't want to make things worse. Her words hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment, I faltered. What if I was wrong? What if my suspicion was driving a wedge between us that didn't need to exist? The tension seemed to ease over the next few days. Emily was warmer, more present. She started texting me during the day again, little messages about work, or asking how the kids were doing. For a brief, flickering moment, I wondered if I'd been wrong. But then, Friday evening came, and the world shifted again. I was putting away laundry when I heard her phone buzz on the nightstand. She was in the shower, so I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Scott. Can't wait for tomorrow. Same time, same place? My blood ran cold. When Emily came out of the bathroom, towel drying her hair, I stood frozen, holding the phone. She stopped mid-step, her expression morphing from confusion to alarm. What's that? She asked, her voice thin, barely above a whisper. Same time, same place? I read aloud, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and betrayal. Care to explain? Her mouth opened and closed, her face blanching. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, her carefully constructed facade crumbling in front of me. And in that moment, everything I'd feared was confirmed. There was no misunderstanding, no overreaction. There was only the truth I had been dreading. Mark, it's not what you think, Emily stammered, clutching the edge of the towel like it was a shield. Not what I think, I said, my voice a mix of disbelief and anger. Do you have any idea what this looks like? The hotel? The gas station? Scott. I threw her phone onto the bed, the screen still lit with Scott's text message. You've been lying to me, Emily. So stop pretending this is all in my head. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her towel slipping slightly, revealing the trembling of her hands. Please let me explain. Then explain, I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. Tell me how any of this is innocent. Because I don't see it. She exhaled sharply, pressing her palms to her forehead. You're right. I lied. About the hotel, about where I've been. But it's not what you think. I swear. I folded my arms, anger bubbling just beneath the surface. Then enlighten me. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, I saw tears welling in her eyes. I've been meeting Scott, but it's not an affair. It's about you. Me. I scoffed, taking a step back. You expect me to believe that? You're sneaking around with Scott behind my back for my benefit? Yes, she cried, her voice breaking. You've been distant for months, Mark. Withdrawn, like you're carrying the weight of the world but refusing to share it. I've tried to reach you, but you just shut me out. I stared at her, the anger giving way to a flicker of confusion. So, what? You ran to Scott for advice? Why him? She hesitated, wiping at her eyes. Because he's known us for so long. Because he understands you in ways I thought he could help me figure out what's wrong. That doesn't explain the hotel, the secrecy, the lies, I said, my voice cold. She looked away, biting her lip. The hotel wasn't what you think. It was a meeting. With Scott. She nodded. I felt my chest tighten, but not with anger this time. With something more hollow, more unsettling. What kind of meeting requires a hotel, Emily? Her hesitation was answer enough. Emily. My voice dropped, low and firm. Finally, she looked at me, her expression one of raw vulnerability. I've been trying to figure out if you're having an affair. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What? I found the perfume receipt, she said, her voice trembling. The one from the department store. It wasn't my brand, and it wasn't a gift for me. I saw you meeting someone outside the coffee shop a few weeks ago. A woman. My jaw dropped. You think I'm having an affair? It's not just what I think, she said quickly. It's what I've been seeing. The distance. The time you spend away from home. I didn't know how to confront you, so I went to Scott. I asked him to help me figure out the truth. The weight of her words sank in, mingling with my own guilt and frustration. I thought back to the coffee shop, to a chance meeting with an old colleague I hadn't thought worth mentioning. And the perfume. I'd bought it as a birthday gift for my assistant, a gesture of gratitude for covering for me during a chaotic project. Emily, I said, my voice shaking, you're wrong. About all of it. She looked up, her expression a mix of hope and doubt. Then why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't think I had to explain every detail of my life to prove I'm not cheating, I said. Because I trusted you to trust me. Her face crumpled, tears streaming freely now. I was scared. I thought if I confronted you, I'd lose you. And the thought of losing you, Mark, it broke me. And what about Scott? I demanded. What role does he play in all this? She hesitated, then said, he was trying to help. He thought maybe I was being paranoid. But when you started asking questions, I panicked. I lied because I didn't know how to explain why I was meeting him. The tension in the room felt unbearable, the truth more complicated than I'd imagined. We'd both been living in separate, parallel fears, each too consumed by doubt to see the other's pain. Why didn't you just talk to me? I asked, my voice breaking. I should have, she whispered. I was afraid, and I made everything worse. The next morning, we sat in silence over coffee, the weight of the conversation still heavy between us. The kids were at a sleepover, giving us the rare luxury of privacy, but it felt more like a punishment than a reprieve. What now? She asked quietly. I stared into my mug, the steam curling upward like a ghost of the life we'd had before this. I don't know. I love you, she said, her voice desperate. I don't want to lose us. I looked up at her, seeing the fear and regret etched into her face. But I also saw the cracks, the damage we'd done to each other, intentional or not. I love you too, I said finally. But what we've done to each other, I don't know how to fix it. Her lip quivered, but she nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that love was enough, that we could mend what had been broken. But deep down, I knew the truth. The trust we'd shattered might never be whole again. That evening, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, grappling with the choice before me. Forgiveness felt like a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. But walking away meant leaving behind a life we'd built together. A life I still cared about, even in its fractured state. The decision felt impossible. But as dawn broke and light spilled into the room, I realized something else. Sometimes, love isn't about fixing what's broken. Sometimes, it's about letting go, for both of your sakes. And with that thought, I knew what I had to do.